July 30th, 1945. The USS Indianapolis sank in 12 minutes. 900 men went into the water. Only 317 survived. They floated for 5 days in the Philippine Sea. No lifeboats, no rescue plan. Shark-infested waters. This is the story of the worst naval disaster in United States history, and the men who refused to die. The USS Indianapolis was a Portland-class heavy cruiser, commissioned in 1932. Length, 610 feet. Displacement, 9,950 tons. Crew complement, 1,196 men. By July 1945, the Indianapolis had earned 10 battle stars. She fought at the Gilbert Islands, the Marshall Islands, the Marianas, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. On March 31, 1945, a Japanese kamikaze struck her starboard side, killing 9 men and wounding 20. The ship limped to Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California for repairs. The repairs took 4 months. While the Indianapolis sat in dry dock, the war in Europe ended. Germany surrendered May 8, 1945. Japan fought on alone. In late July, the Indianapolis received orders for a secret mission. The ship would carry components of the atomic bomb called Little Boy from San Francisco to Tinian Island in the Marianas. The mission was classified at the highest level. Captain Charles McVeigh III commanded the ship. He had taken command in November 1944 and was a 1920 graduate of the United States Naval Academy. The Indianapolis departed San Francisco on July 16, 1945. Carrying the uranium-235 projectile and target components for the atomic bomb. The ship made the crossing to Tinian in 10 days, arriving July 26. The crew didn't know what they carried. They offloaded the components to Army Air Force custody on Tinian, and the mission was complete. Little Boy would be dropped on Hiroshima 11 days later. After delivering the bomb components, the Indianapolis received new orders. Proceed to Guam for training exercises, then continued to Leyte Gulf in the Philippines to join the battleship USS Idaho for pre-invasion exercises. The planned invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, would require every available ship. The Indianapolis departed Tinian on July 28, arriving at Guam later that day. The crew took on fuel, supplies, and 25 additional sailors who needed transport to Leyte. The ship departed Guam at 900 hours on July 28, 1945. Captain McVeigh plotted a course to Leyte Gulf, approximately 1,300 miles west-southwest, standard sailing time, 3 days. Estimated arrival, July 31st, early morning. The Navy routed the Indianapolis along what they called the Petty Route, named for the routing officer. This was not a designated convoy route. The ship sailed alone. No destroyer escort accompanied her. Navy doctrine at this stage of the war considered the Philippine Sea relatively safe. Japanese naval forces had been decimated. Submarine activity had decreased significantly. This assessment was wrong. The Indianapolis sailed at 17 knots, zigzagging during daylight hours as a precaution against submarine attack. Standard procedure. At night, visibility dropped, and Captain McVeigh ordered the ship to sail straight. The zigzag pattern would resume at dawn. Weather conditions, July 29th, partly cloudy, good visibility.com seas. Temperature, 85 degrees. The crew settled into routine watches. Some men slept, others played cards, wrote letters home, or stood their duty stations. On July 30th, 1945, at approximately 14 minutes past midnight, everything changed. The Japanese submarine I-58 had been patrolling the Philippine Sea since July 18, 1945. Commander Mokatsura Hashimoto commanded the boat. I-58 was a Type B-3 submarine, 356 feet long, armed with 6 torpedo tubes and carrying 19 torpedoes. Hashimoto had orders to patrol shipping lanes between Guam and Leyte, attacking any Allied vessels encountered. By July 29th, the submarine had been at sea for 12 days without sighting a target. At 1100 hours on July 29th, Hashimoto surfaced to recharge batteries. At 2300 hours, the submarine surfaced again. The night was dark, visibility poor. Hashimoto scanned the horizon through his periscope. At 2300 hours on July 29th, I-58's lookout spotted a target, a dark shape moving across the horizon. Distance, approximately 10 miles. Hashimoto ordered the submarine to periscope depth and approached for identification. The target was zigzagging. Then, at approximately midnight, the target straightened its course. Captain McVeigh had ordered the Indianapolis to stop zigzagging for the night. Standard procedure in darkness. Hashimoto positioned I-58 for attack. Range, 1,500 yards. The target was presenting a perfect broadside silhouette. Hashimoto identified it as a battleship or large cruiser. He ordered 6 torpedoes prepared for firing. At 0:14 on July 30, 1945, I-58 fired 6 Type 95 torpedoes. To struck the USS Indianapolis. The first torpedo hit the starboard bow, near frame 20. The explosion vaporized the forward section and ignited aviation fuel stored nearby. The blast destroyed the ship's forward compartments and killed everyone in that section instantly. The second torpedo struck near frame 50, just forward of the bridge. The explosion demolished the ship's communications equipment, destroyed the power generation systems, and ruptured fuel tanks. Flames shot 500 feet into the air. The Indianapolis immediately began listing to starboard. Water poured through the massive holes torn in the hull. The forward section dropped below the waterline within minutes. Captain McVeigh was thrown from his bunk by the first explosion. He ran to the bridge and assessed the damage. The list increased to 20 degrees. The ship had no power, no radio, no way to send a distress signal. The engineering officer reported massive flooding in the forward compartments and engine rooms. Pumps were offline. The list continued increasing. At approximately 0:26 minutes after the torpedo strikes, Captain McVeigh gave the order. Abandon ship. Many men never heard the order. The ship's intercom system was destroyed. Officers and senior enlisted men spread the word by shouting down hatches and through passageways. Men grabbed life jackets and headed topside. Others were trapped below decks as compartments flooded. The Indianapolis carried 1,196 men that night. Approximately 300 went down with the ship, killed instantly by the explosions or trapped below decks as she sank. At 0:27, 12 minutes after the torpedo strikes, the USS Indianapolis rolled completely over, bow first, and disappeared beneath the surface of the Philippine Sea. Approximately 900 men went into the water. The water temperature was 85 degrees, warm, but hypothermia would still be a factor after prolonged exposure. The men floated in the darkness, scattered across several miles of ocean. Most wore life jackets, some didn't. Navy-issue kapok life jackets kept a man afloat, but they weren't comfortable. The kapok absorbed water and became heavy. The jackets chafed shoulders and necks. They provided flotation, not support. Men had to keep their heads above water through constant effort. Some men had grabbed life rafts as the ship went down. The Indianapolis carried approximately 35 life rafts, each designed to hold 25 men. In the chaos of abandoning ship, only 12 rafts made it into the water intact. Perhaps 150 men reached the rafts. The other 750 floated in life jackets alone. The night was dark. Men called out, trying to find shipmates. Groups began forming. Men linked together, grabbing each other's life jackets, creating human chains to avoid drifting apart. Lieutenant Commander Lewis Haynes, the ship's senior medical officer, organized one of the largest groups. Approximately 400 men clustered around Haynes and several other officers. They floated together, trying to maintain unit cohesion. Another large group formed around Ensign Harlan Twibble, perhaps 300 men. A third group, smaller, maybe 100 men, floated separately. Dozens of men floated alone, separated from the main groups in the darkness. The men expected rescue quickly. The Indianapolis was a major warship with nearly 1,200 crew when she failed to arrive at Leyte Gulf. As scheduled on July 31st, the Navy would send search planes. standard procedure. The men would be in the water for a few hours. Maybe until dawn, rescue would come. This assumption was wrong. The Navy didn't know the Indianapolis had sunk. Dawn broke around 600 hours. The sun rose, and for the first time, the men could see their situation clearly. Water, nothing but water. No land, no ships, no rescue planes. They floated in the Philippine Sea, approximately 250 miles from the nearest land. The ocean stretched to the horizon in every direction. The sun climbed higher. Temperature rose. By noon, the tropical sun beat down with brutal intensity. Men without helmets or caps suffered immediately. Sunburn started within hours. The reflected glare of the water burned their faces from below. Lips cracked, skin blistered. Thirst became a problem almost immediately. Salt water surrounded the men, but drinking it would be fatal. The human body can't process the salt concentration in seawater. Drinking it causes dehydration, organ failure, and death. Some men had no water at all. Others had small amounts they'd grabbed from the ship. A few men on the life rafts had emergency water rations, but not much. A few ounces per man, maximum. By midday, July 30th, men began drinking seawater. Drinking seawater causes predictable symptoms. First, increased thirst as the body tries to dilute the salt concentration. Second, confusion and disorientation. Third, hallucinations. Fourth, organ failure and death. Men who drank seawater started exhibiting strange behavior by afternoon. They saw islands that didn't exist. They saw rescue ships on the horizon. They claimed the Indianapolis was just below them, offering cool drinks in the galley. Some men took off their life jackets and dove down, trying to reach the ship. They drowned. Others became violent, attacking shipmates, convinced they were Japanese soldiers or enemy spies. Lieutenant Commander Haynes tried to keep order in his group. He ordered men not to drink seawater. He organized schedules, keeping men mentally engaged. Count off, stay together, stay alert, help is coming. The temperature reached 95 degrees. Men vomited from heat exposure. Some passed out. Others simply gave up, slipping out of their life jackets and sinking beneath the surface. By nightfall, on July 30th, approximately 50 men had died. Still, no rescue planes appeared. Sharks inhabit the Philippine Sea in large numbers. Oceanic whitetip sharks, tiger sharks, and blue sharks are common in these waters. The explosions that sank the Indianapolis, the blood from injured men, and the thrashing of 900 men in the water created a scent trail visible to sharks for miles. The sharks arrived on July 30th. Oceanic whitetip sharks are aggressive. They're known as sea dogs because they investigate anything unfamiliar. They grow to 13 feet long and weigh up to 370 pounds. They have powerful jaws and serrated teeth designed to tear flesh. The first shark attacks came in daylight. A man would scream. The water would churn. Red would spread. Then silence. The man would disappear. The attacks increased throughout July 30th. Men on the edges of groups were most vulnerable. Isolated swimmers had no protection. The sharks circled, bumped, tested, then struck. Some attacks were quick. A man vanished in seconds. Others lasted longer. Men thrashing, screaming, fighting. Shipmates tried to help, but there was nothing they could do. No weapons, no way to fight back. They could only watch as sharks dragged their friends beneath the surface. By nightfall, July 30th, shark attacks had killed dozens. The men tried countermeasures. They kicked when sharks approached. They splashed water, trying to scare them away. They formed tight groups, protecting the center. Men on the outside faced the sharks, creating a human barrier. Nothing worked. The sharks kept coming. Night brought temporary relief. Sharks typically feed during daylight hours. After dark, the attacks decreased. But they didn't stop. Men disappeared in the darkness. Screams echoed across the water. Dawn would reveal how many were gone. Lieutenant Commander Haynes later estimated that sharks killed approximately 80 men during the ordeal. Other survivors estimated higher numbers. The exact count is impossible to determine. Many men who died from other causes, dehydration, exhaustion, exposure, were scavenged by sharks after death. July 31st, 1945. The men had been in the water for approximately 30 hours. The sun rose, still no rescue planes. This was the day the Indianapolis should have arrived at Leyte Gulf. Captain McVeigh had filed a movement report stating the ship would arrive early morning. July 31st, when the ship didn't arrive, someone should have noticed. No one did. The Navy had a systemic problem with arrival reports in 1945. Standard procedure required port commanders to report when ships failed to arrive as scheduled. But the procedure wasn't consistently enforced. Ships sometimes arrived late due to weather, operational delays, or routing changes. Port commanders often didn't report non-arrivals immediately, waiting to see if the ship showed up later. At Leyte Gulf, the port director noted that the Indianapolis hadn't arrived. He assumed the ship had been delayed or rerouted. He didn't file a report. This failure would prove catastrophic. Meanwhile, the men floated. July 31st brought the same brutal conditions as July 30th. Sun, heat, thirst, sharks. More men drank seawater. More hallucinations. More deaths. Oil from the ship's ruptured fuel tanks coated many men. The oil burned exposed skin, causing rashes and sores. Men tried to scrape it off, but that just spread it. The oil got in their eyes, causing temporary blindness. It got in their mouths when waves washed over them, causing nausea. Some men developed hypothermia despite the warm water temperature. Prolonged exposure, even to 85-degree water, causes core temperature to drop over days. Men shivered uncontrollably. Their lips turned blue. They became lethargic and disoriented. The life raft groups had slightly better conditions. The rafts kept men out of the water, reducing hypothermia risk. But the rafts had problems too. They were overcrowded, designed for 25 men, but carrying 30 or more. Men took turns in the water, clinging to the sides to give others a chance to rest. The raft groups had minimal supplies, emergency rations, a few tins of crackers, malted milk tablets, maybe a gallon of water total. Officers rationed everything carefully. 1 cracker per man per day. A capful of water, not enough. By nightfall July 31st, approximately 200 men had died. 700 remained alive. August 1st, 1945. 60 hours in the water. Men were dying faster now. The combination of dehydration, exposure, exhaustion, and shark attacks was overwhelming. Groups that had numbered hundreds were shrinking. Lieutenant Commander Haynes's group had started with approximately 400 men. By August 1st, perhaps 250 remained. Men slipped out of their life jackets during the night and sank. Others died from drinking seawater, their organs shutting down. Still others simply gave up, too exhausted to continue. The kapok life jackets were failing. Prolonged exposure to salt water degraded the kapok fibers. The jackets became waterlogged and heavy. They provided less buoyancy. Men had to work harder to keep their heads above water. Some men stripped their life jackets and swam, trying to find better jackets from dead sailors. This was dangerous. Swimming attracted sharks. But a functioning life jacket meant survival. So men took the risk. Discipline was breaking down. Officers tried to maintain order, but it was increasingly difficult. Men who drank seawater became violent and unpredictable. They fought with shipmates. They tried to swim away. Officers and senior enlisted men had to physically restrain them. The heat remained brutal. No clouds, no rain, no relief. Men's skin burned, blistered, and peeled. Their tongues swelled, their throats closed. Speaking became difficult. Some men prayed. Others sang hymns or naval songs to keep morale up. Many simply floated in silence, conserving energy, waiting for rescue that never came. By nightfall, August 1st, approximately 500 men remained alive. 400 were dead. August 2nd, 1945. 84 hours in the water. Back at Naval Headquarters, no one knew the Indianapolis was missing. The ship's failure to arrive at Leyte Gulf had been noted, but not reported. The Indianapolis simply didn't exist on anyone's radar. This was partly due to secrecy surrounding the ship's atomic bomb mission. After delivering the components to Tinian, the Indianapolis had been traveling under restricted movement orders. Only certain personnel knew the ship's location and destination. When the ship didn't arrive at Leyte Gulf, the assumption was that operational security was involved. Perhaps the ship had been rerouted. Perhaps new orders had been issued. Nobody wanted to break security protocol by asking too many questions. This bureaucratic paralysis cost lives. The men in the water had no knowledge of this. They simply knew that rescue hadn't come. By August 2nd, hope was fading. Men who had remained optimistic were becoming resigned. Rescue would come, or it wouldn't. There was nothing they could do but float and wait. Physical condition was deteriorating rapidly. For days without food, minimal water, constant sun exposure, and swimming to stay afloat had exhausted everyone. Men's faces were skeletal, ribs showed, muscles had atrophied. Hallucinations were universal now. Even men who hadn't drunk seawater were seeing things. Dehydration, exhaustion, and sun exposure caused the brain to malfunction. Men saw islands, ships, rescue planes. They heard voices. Some believed they were already rescued and safe aboard ships. Others experienced more disturbing hallucinations. They saw the Indianapolis beneath them, intact, with hatches open. They became convinced they needed to swim down and retrieve supplies. They removed their life jackets and dove. They never came back up. The groups were fragmenting. Organized clusters of hundreds had broken into smaller pods of dozens. Then smaller still. Men drifted apart. Some intentionally, others unintentionally. The currents and waves separated them over miles of ocean. By nightfall, August 2nd, approximately 350 men remained alive. August 3rd, 1945. 108 hours in the water. 4.5 days. At 1000 hours, Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn flew a routine patrol in a PV-1 Ventura bomber. He was based at Peleliu, conducting anti-submarine patrols over the Philippine Sea. Weather was clear, visibility good, standard mission. At 1100 hours, Gwynn noticed an oil slick on the ocean's surface. Oil slicks sometimes indicated submarine activity. He descended to investigate. At approximately 1,100 feet altitude, Gwynn spotted something in the water. Not a submarine, people. Gwynn descended to 300 feet and made a closer pass. He saw heads, bodies, men waving, life rafts, dozens of men, then more, hundreds. Gwynn immediately radioed Peleliu. Survivors in the water. Position, 11 degrees, 30 minutes north. Latitude, 133 degrees. 30 minutes east longitude. Hundreds of men. Request immediate rescue. Peleliu received the message at 11:15 hours. But they didn't know who the survivors were. No ships had been reported missing in that area. The duty officer assumed it was a downed aircraft crew, maybe a dozen men. Gwynn continued circling, dropping life rafts and emergency supplies. He marked the location with dye markers. Other aircraft were dispatched to assist. At approximately 1300 hours, a Navy PBY Catalina seaplane, piloted by Lieutenant Adrian Marks, arrived on scene. Marks surveyed the situation from altitude and immediately recognized the scale of the disaster. This wasn't a downed aircraft crew. This was a major naval disaster. Marks radioed back. Hundreds of men in the water, many in critical condition. Sharks in the area, immediate rescue required. Marks made a decision that violated Navy regulations. PBY Catalinas were not supposed to land in open ocean. The swells were too unpredictable. Landing was dangerous. But Marks saw men dying below him. He couldn't wait for surface ships to arrive. At 13:30 hours, Marks landed the Catalina in 12-foot swells. The impact damaged the aircraft's hull, making it unable to take off again. Marks didn't care. He taxied toward the survivors and began pulling men from the water. The PBY was designed to carry a crew of 8. Marks pulled aboard 56 men. He crammed them into every available space: wings, fuselage, anywhere. More men clung to the wings and tail, too exhausted to climb inside. Other rescue aircraft arrived. They dropped additional life rafts, food, and water. They radioed for surface ships. Help was coming, but it would take hours. The destroyer, USS Cecil J. Doyle, received the rescue call at 1500 hours. Captain Clayton commanding. Distance to survivors, approximately 50 miles. The Doyle immediately changed course and increased speed to maximum 24 knots. Estimated arrival, 7 hours. The destroyer USS Bassett also responded, along with several other vessels. As darkness fell August 3rd, the rescue ships arrived on scene. The Doyle reached the area at approximately 2300 hours. Captain Clayton ordered searchlights turned on, violating blackout procedures. The risk of attracting enemy submarines was secondary to finding survivors in the darkness. The searchlights swept across the water. They illuminated men floating, life rafts, boadies, oil slicks, sharks. Sailors aboard the Doyle threw cargo nets over the side. They climbed down and pulled survivors aboard. Many men were too weak to climb. Sailors went into the water to retrieve them. The rescue operation continued through the night. Other ships arrived and joined the effort. By dawn, August 4th, the ships had recovered every living man they could find. Final count: 317 survivors. 883 men died. The USS Indianapolis disaster remains the worst loss of life from a single ship sinking in United States Navy history. 883 dead from a crew of 1,196. Approximately 300 men died when the ship sank, killed by the torpedo explosions or trapped below decks. The other 583 died in the water over 5 days. Dehydration, exposure, exhaustion, shark attacks, drowning. The survivors were transported to hospitals in Guam and Peleliu. Many were in critical condition. Severe dehydration required intravenous fluids. Burns needed treatment. Wounds from sharks required surgery. Some men had been so badly sunburned that their skin had turned black and peeled off in sheets. Others had infections from oil exposure. Many had swallowed so much salt water that their kidneys were failing. 12 men died after rescue, their injuries too severe. The final survivor count dropped to 317. The Navy immediately launched an investigation. How did a major warship sink without anyone noticing for 4 days? Why was no distress signal received? Why did the ship sail without escort? The investigation revealed systemic failures. The Indianapolis had sent no distress signal because the torpedo strikes destroyed the radio equipment. The Navy's arrival reporting system had failed. The Leyte Gulf port director had noted the ship's non-arrival, but hadn't reported it. The ship's sailing orders hadn't required an escort because Navy intelligence assessed the route as safe. Captain Charles McVeigh was the only officer to survive the sinking. In November 1945, the Navy convened a court-martial. McVeigh faced 2 charges: failing to zigzag in the presence of known submarine activity, and failing to order abandoned ship in a timely manner. The second charge was dropped. The first charge went to trial. Commander Hashimoto of I-58 testified at the court-martial, brought from Japan specifically for the trial. Hashimoto stated that zigzagging would not have prevented the attack. The Indianapolis had presented a perfect target. Despite Hashimoto's testimony, the court-martial found McVeigh guilty. He was convicted of hazarding his ship by failing to zigzag. The sentence: a reprimand. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz remitted the sentence, but the conviction remained on McVeigh's record. McVeigh was the only U.S. Navy captain convicted by court-martial for losing his ship to enemy action during World War II. The conviction haunted him for the rest of his life. Some survivors blamed him for the disaster. Others defended him, arguing that Navy failures, not McVeigh's actions, caused the tragedy. In 1968, at age 70, Charles McVeigh committed suicide. He used his Navy service revolver and shot himself on his front lawn in Litchfield, Connecticut. Survivors of the Indianapolis spent decades advocating for McVeigh's exoneration. They argued the court-martial was unjust, that McVeigh had been scapegoated for systemic Navy failures. In 2000, Congress passed a resolution exonerating Captain McVeigh. President Bill Clinton signed it into law. The Navy officially cleared McVeigh's record. The loss of the USS Indianapolis led to immediate changes in Navy procedure. The arrival reporting system was overhauled. Port commanders were required to report non-arrivals within hours, not days. Ships were required to sail with escorts in areas where submarine activity was possible, regardless of intelligence assessments. The Navy also improved survival training. Sailors received instruction on resisting the temptation to drink seawater. They learned how to maintain group cohesion during long-term survival situations. They practiced using life rafts and emergency equipment. The Indianapolis survivors formed an association in 1946. They held annual reunions, maintaining bonds formed during those 5 days in the water. They supported each other through the decades of physical and psychological recovery. Many survivors suffered from what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety around water, the sound of men screaming in the night, the sight of sharks circling. These memories never faded. Lieutenant Commander Lewis Haynes, who organized one of the largest survival groups, continued practicing medicine after the war. He rarely spoke about the Indianapolis. When he did, he focused on the courage of the men, not the horror they endured. Giles McCoy, a Marine private who survived, became a chiropractor in Missouri. He spent years advocating for Captain McVeigh's exoneration. McCoy testified before Congress multiple times, arguing that McVeigh had been blamed unfairly. Harlan Twible, who had been an ensign aboard the Indianapolis, returned to civilian life and worked in business. He attended reunions and maintained contact with fellow survivors. Twible lived to age 89, dying in 2013. By 2025, all survivors of the USS Indianapolis have passed away. The last survivor, Harold Bray, died in 2018 at age 96. In 2017, a civilian research expedition led by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen located the wreck of the USS Indianapolis. The ship rests at a depth of 18,000 feet in the Philippine Sea. Approximately 250 miles from where the survivors were rescued. The wreck is a war grave, protected by law. It may not be disturbed. The ship remains as it sank 73 years ago, a memorial to the 883 men who died. 900 men went into the water on July 30, 1945. They floated for 5 days without rescue, without food, minimal water, under the tropical sun, surrounded by sharks, watching friends die, wondering if help would ever come. 317 survived. They survived through determination, group cohesion, and sheer refusal to give up. They survived because men like Lieutenant Commander Haynes organized groups and maintained discipline, because men shared the few life rafts available, because they helped each other even when their own survival was in doubt. They survived because Lieutenant Wilbur Gwynn happened to fly over that specific patch of ocean at 1100 hours on August 3, because Lieutenant Adrian Marks violated regulations and landed his PBY in open ocean to pull men from the water, because the USS Doyle and other rescue ships responded immediately and searched through the night. The USS Indianapolis survivors represent the thousands of sailors who served in the Pacific during World War II. They faced dangers that most people cannot imagine: submarine attacks, kamikaze strikes, typhoons, battles that lasted months. They served on ships that could be sunk with 2 torpedoes and 12 minutes warning. 883 men died in the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. Their names are recorded on memorials in Indianapolis, Indiana, and at the Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C. They are remembered not for how they died, but for their service. The 317 survivors carried the memory of those 5 days for the rest of their lives. They remembered the men who didn't make it. They told their stories so the sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten. This is how they survived. This is why we remember.